Bienvenidos, señoras y señores, to another episode of the Bleed Lows podcast. This episode of the Bleed Lows podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting, and your favorite casino and card games are available to play right from your phone. Head to the website or use our mobile device to sign up today and get in on the action. Remember to use the promo code BELIEVE, B-L-E-A-V, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts. I want to transition to the Dodgers and especially what happened this weekend in Boston, the reunion of Mookie. I don't know if you're working on a piece or not, but I'm very curious to hear your opinion on this. The difference between Mookie going back to Boston and Freddie Freeman going to Atlanta. Now, I don't know if it was the Mookie thing because, you know, it's been a long time since he last played in Boston, and the Freddie one was more recent, but it felt very different to me. Mookie got a lot of love, and he had a very successful weekend over there. And he basically didn't say anything inflammatory. Mookie was just like, talk to the Red Sox owners why they didn't, you know. But prior to that, you're hearing Mookie wanted to be in Boston for his whole career. What were your thoughts on Mookie's reunion this weekend in Boston?
Yeah, well, I think it's a difference between, right, like in Freeman's case, there were like legitimate like baseball reasons, I guess. Right. And if you look at the way the Braves have gone on since and the way Matt Olson's played, right, they probably made the smart move, you know. Now, I don't think, you know, and again, we're going to have, right, people kind of disagree with stuff, and that's totally fine, obviously. Like, I can just kind of think that like teams are like civic institutions, right? And as a result, like, you know, stuff like connections with fans like matter, you know, and I am really kind of repulsed at this idea, you know, that keep in mind, before I like lit into Freddie for all the crying and stuff, I actually, before that, like when the Dodgers first signed him, I went after like Antopoulos, right?
Yeah.
For like fake crying shit, like get the fuck out of here.
No, nobody remembers that though, yeah. Dylan. Nobody remembers that you went in on him.
Right, because like he wanted to do that, I think, right? That was, you know, and so, like, what I think in Freddie's case, like, he was, like, kind of hurt because, like, you know, again, you can make a baseball argument for why that should have been done, right? And, you know, and fans tend to be protective of their teams, right? And so, like, when he kind of, like, lashed out at that, and keep in mind, at that point, he and I were on the same side on this, you know, when he kind of lashed out, the fans protected the team. Right. And that always happens, by the way. As a player, never go against a team. You're always going to lose, almost always going to lose. And that's kind of what happened there. Right. And so it kind of created this weird thing. And now he doesn't want those fans to hate him. So he kind of like bent over backwards, I felt, to try to like win them back. The thing with the Mookie thing, clearly the Red Sox fucked up. Right. They really, really fucked up. I mean, and I would argue that this is an example of why the Angels were right to not trade Ohtani. Right. Even with him getting hurt, by the way, because unless that trade sets you up to be better, like relatively quickly, it just like deflates your organization. It's a white, right? It's like the Nationals in Soto.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't matter.
Hey,
like
right now the Nationals are looking pretty good in that deal.
Yeah. Yeah. But like, yeah, but you know what I mean? It's a pin in the right, you know.
Yeah.
And I think like with the Mookie thing, you know, again, like, okay, so they got out of paying him the $300 million, whatever contract that they didn't want to pay him, you know? And so, you know, theoretically they have like a certain amount of flexibility now that they wouldn't have had they signed him into a long-term deal. You can argue blah, blah, blah. But like, you know, the way it's played out, you know, is that the Red Sox fucked up, you know? And so I think that the circumstances were different because Mookie didn't have to win them, right? Like now it's, if anything, after that trade and what's happened since, like the fans are all pissed off at the Red Sox for having made that deal, right? So when they're like applauding Mookie, part of it too, there's kind of an indirect like fuck you to the Red Sox, right? Because, you know, hey, like you traded away like our best guy, whatever. You know, I think again, like just the Atlanta situation with Freeman, I just think was just like a lot more complicated because it wasn't that straightforward, you know. And so, yeah, like in this case, clearly, like, you know, would you want, you know, if you're the Red Sox, do you want Mookie Betts back? Of course you do, you know, because they have like nothing, right? I mean, they might have flexibility, but like, what's that good for? What have they done with that? You know, so I just think that, yeah, you know, again, you know, and who knows, right? Maybe the way we view this, I mean, he's under contract for how many more years? Like 10
I
after
think
this,
it's
right? So,
it's
right.
like
So,
9, I think now. I think it's
yeah,
down to
right.
9.
Right. So, like, you know, I mean, I'm sure if we talk in 7 years, the view on this might be slightly different by then. Like, why the Dodgers do this, you know?
Right.
But, like, yeah, for now, I think that it was just one of these situations where, like, the Red Sox Nation recognizes, you know, we were better off with this guy. You know, let's kind of remember, right? When you're applauding a guy like that, you're basically saying, like, hey, we shared good times together, right? It's an
Right.
acknowledgement of your shared history. And so, you know, I think they gave him his flowers.
Look, it was a very exciting weekend of baseball. There were 3 very exciting games, and everybody seemed to have been successful. Justin Turner had a nice weekend. Alex Verdugo was able to give the FU that he's been wanting to give for who knows how long. I mean, the only thing we didn't see Kenley because he's hurt. But have you ever seen or a series where there's been this many connections between 2 teams?
Yeah, it is. It's interesting, right? Just the way, you know, and it's not just connections; it's like vital connections, right?
Yeah,
Kenley Jansen is the Dodgers' all-time saves leader. You know, Justin Turner, you know, with the between the beard and kind of the October heroics and right all the stuff he was doing in the community and the fact that he kind of became like the de facto captain of the team, right? These are right like major, you know, and even like Verdugo, who right kind of like in this cast of characters counts as like a relatively minor guy,
yeah,
you know,
uh-huh.
is like a pretty colorful guy, right?
Yeah.
You know, you talk about a guy like Kike Hernandez, who, you know, whatever you think of him as a player, obviously kind of has this very oversized personality, has connected with fans, you know, obviously the way he's viewed here, the way he's viewed Boston, very different. But you're right. I think that there are kind of like a lot of like connections there. You know, it felt a little like American footballish, right? Where,
Right. Yeah.
you know, because of the coaching trees usually, and, you know, guys import entire staffs into one team and, right, will bring along a few players even with them and stuff. It had that type of feel to it for sure.
Or even the managers, right? Cora
Yeah,
and
right.
Roberts, right?
Yeah, I saw a picture of somebody sent me a picture of Dave Roberts. I think it was either this morning or yesterday, right, where he's posing in front of the, you know, the green monster. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. You know, right, and we just, I mean, right, and that just shows, right, the fact that like I even forgot about Dave Roberts rolling this whole thing. I think just shows like again the amount of kind of cross pollination that these two organizations have.
Do you think that this weekend is an example of just how different baseball is now to back in the day where there was no fraternizing or anything like that? I know we had Rob Bradford on the show from Boston who I tend to agree with his statement when he says baseball is the least political sport there is, and it's because these guys don't want conflict. They run away from conflict. So when you have team guys that you've played with, it's more about it. Hey, let's, you know, everything is good. I don't care about beating you, win or lose.
Yeah, and I think that the, you know, kind of the old school examples that we have in our heads. I mean, the truth is that then back then, how much a guy got paid was more direct, right? It had a greater effect on how much, you know, the wins and the losses, right?
Yeah.
And so the thing is, because contracts weren't guaranteed the way they are now, guys didn't have multi-year deals the way they do now. And so, like, yeah, like if, you know, you lost a game, that was like food off your table, literally, right? And that was back in an era again when, you know, players, you know, a lot of them had off-season jobs even, right? This wasn't the kind of luxury job it is now. I do think now, right, like, you know, when you kind of look at, you know, guys still kind of throw at each other and stuff every now and then, but right, the kind of like egregious headhunting that used to happen before, I do think that right, and I think that, by the way, that's probably like an almost like an underutilized strategy in a way, right? Like,
Joe
nailing
Kelly's the
somebody.
only one who uses
Yeah,
it, I
yeah,
think.
nailing somebody with a baseball, I do think is like a real strong deterrent. Yet, like, why doesn't it happen as much? It's because, like, well, you know what? Like, we're all making money here. Yes, I want to win, but like, I don't have to kind of resort to the dark arts to win, right? Like, let's you know make sure everybody stays healthy. Let's try to play this thing fair, and whoever wins wins. And at the end of the day, we all go home rich. And I do think that is probably and then now, like, probably like the way teams are run now, right? Where yeah, sure, like before, guys would get traded before, right? Guys that were free agents would go somewhere else, but the way deals are done now, where it's like, okay, we're gonna punt, right? We're gonna suck. We're gonna make a conscious decision to put out a garbage product for the next like 4 years. So, hey, Team X, do you want every one of our usable players? And so you kind of end up with these, right, entire like line shifts, right? I mean, the first trade, you mentioned stuff like that. I mean, it kind of started, I think, with that Adrian Gonzalez trade, right?
Yeah,
Or
that's another example. Yeah,
or the Nick Punto trade, if you want, right? Where like basically every single guy there, like, it's just like, okay, we're just gonna trade our teams for each other's, basically, And so I do think that part of it too, where teams are more willing to trade in bulk because again, the strategy, the long term strategy in terms of like tanking and stuff like that is very much in play now.
The last thing I wanted to ask you was, you and Plashke at the trade deadline, you wrote some critical pieces on Andrew Friedman. And here's the thing. Those pieces that you wrote aren't really about the regular season. I think everyone knew, hey, these guys have enough to win the division. Right. In the end, it's about the postseason. And a lot of the people that I talk to, they all say the same thing. It's about the pitching staff. They don't feel confident with the Dodgers pitching staff going into the playoffs. From what you're seeing, and if they do end up seeing, I mean, we're going to see the Bravos next week here in LA, but if they do end up in the playoffs, I mean, do you still think it's the same thing? They did not address what is going to be a big issue for them in the playoffs?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, in fairness to them, I do think that, they needed a couple of things to go their way, right? And maybe these things will happen, right? Like, one is they need Julio Urías to pitch the way he did in the second half of last year. Mm-hmm. They need Clayton Kershaw to come back and remain healthy and be more than kind of like what he's been, and if those two things don't happen, it almost didn't matter like who they added at that point. Right now, obviously, if you bring in like a Horace, had they brought in like a Verlander type guy, then you can maybe say like, okay, like maybe they have something to work with here, right? But yeah, now the way they're kind of set up is like, and that's the thing is like, right, remember, like just a couple of years ago, they used Urías as like they put an opener in front of the guy,
yeah,
right. So you think they're gonna like, that's the funny thing about this is, right, like I would think that like they would bullpen game every single game if they could. Now, obviously, Clayton would tell them to go fuck themselves. No, not in that language, because Clayton wouldn't ever say something like that. Just to clarify, I don't want him watching this. You're putting words in his mouth, but you'll let them know that's not, But yeah, like, I think they would try to do, and so like you look at their rotation right now, and it's like Julio, Clayton, and then it's going to probably be bullpen game. Now in the first round, because of the way the days off are aligned, right? They basically just, it can, the two big guys can go twice, and then you have one bullpen game, and that's enough. You get to the next round, all of a sudden you're going to start looking at multiple bullpen games, and yeah, I mean, again, even when they don't need to do it, this front office loves to do stuff like this. So like, just, I can just kind of see, and again, every time, man, you make to me, it's just easy, right? Hand one guy the ball, let the guy throw 100 pitches. Fewer decisions, the better. Because every time you make a pitching change, it just takes one guy to screw the whole thing up.
Yeah.
You use 6 pitchers, there's a good chance one of them's not going to have a good day. And again, guys end up in the, I hate to say this, but guys end up in the bullpen for a reason. It's because they don't have enough pitches. They don't have the, right? Their arsenals are limited, and that pigeonholed them into being in bullpens. And if that thing's not working for them that day, they're going to have long days, And so, again, we saw that last year. To me, it kind of looks like they're going to end up kind of in the same place right now. And again, it's such a weird season, right? Because I think that coming into this year, you were looking at the Dodgers thinking like, you know what, if there's a year that they look vulnerable, it's this one, right? If this is going to be the beginning of the end of the dynasty, maybe it's here. And I do think that what this season did show is this thing's not going to, as long as Friedman's in charge, they're going to make the playoffs every year, right? Now, to your point, the thing's about October, and can they get over that hump, And so those are two different, if you really start peeling all this stuff back, well, why did they come into the season with such low expectations, right? Is it because they were not active in free agency either? So did they A, misread the market? B, have they decided to stop spending? C, did Ohtani, right? Are they really saving money to make a run at Ohtani? Or D, did Trevor Bauer screw them up? And here we are a few years later after this Bauer thing. I mean, is this thing still hanging over them in a way, right? I mean, and of all those four scenarios there, the only one that's kind of defensible, I think, is the Ohtani one, right? If they end up with Ohtani, let's say they get bounced from the first round of the playoffs, but then they sign Ohtani, I think everybody will be like, yeah, you know what, we'll take that, right? We're going to have the best player in the game for the next however many years. We sacrificed one season, but whatever. The other ones, I think, it's a little bit harder to stomach, right? I mean, again, you guys, the fans are paying, right? Ticket prices keep going up and up and up and up. And, I mean, boy, it's really expensive to go out there now, parking's expensive now, right? And so all these things, it's I think it's hard to tell the fan that hey, yeah, we're going to try to make the playoffs, but I don't know about winning the whole thing. Well, then the way you guys are charging, you should be all in every year, The Bauer thing again, right? Everybody thought that was a bad idea. It's not really a defensible thing. Did they misread the market? That is also possible, right? Because there was this gambling money that was kind of right. That's going to be coming into the game. We're talking billions of dollars in additional revenue. My guess is that some teams basically kind of jumped the gun on that and hey, we know this money's coming. Let's go and spend. Right? You look at the Bogarts market. I think it's a really good example, right? It's I'm sure there's a price point at which the Dodgers are in on a guy like that. Not in figures, it's a whole different story, right? And so, now that I'm willing to kind of give them some time on, right? Because we've seen the RSN market kind of crash with Bally's, and maybe, right, teams are going to have to start actually tightening their belts. My guess is, right, if MLB is now covering a lot of the Padres' losses, my guess is then that the Padres are going to be kind of on a budget from here on forward. The league's not going to want them to continue spending like this. So, maybe, right, if the Dodgers weren't comfortable paying those prices, right, a few years from now, if we look back, it'll be hey, you know what, that was actually the season to sit out, right? This wasn't, might have cost them. Now, the only problem with that argument, I do think, right, and my main point in kind of when I've examined the Dodgers and just kind of written about them and what they should do is that you have Mookie Betts, you have Freddie Freeman, they're on the wrong side of 30, right? And kind of this year, they're only going to be in their primes together at the same time for so long. And what happened this year, right? Both of them are playing at MVP levels. These are two of the greatest offensive seasons in Dodgers history, and they're happening simultaneously. So why not do everything to take advantage of that, But they haven't. So they're leaving it up to chance in October again.
I want to go back to the bullpen comment that you made. So are you saying they don't have confidence in Lance Lynn or Bobby Miller to be pitching game 3 or game 4?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be, probably with Urias and Kershaw, right? Twice through the order. And with, the other guys probably just once through the order, honestly. I think Miller is the one guy who has the potential to be a twice through the order guy, maybe even a 3 times through the order guy, right? I mean, his stuff is it's just, can he place it where he wants to? I'm not really sure they trust him to do that. Lance Lynn, again, you can trust him to maybe go through once through the order, but do you really want him with that stuff? Going facing an order a second time, a third time. I've always kind of believed players win games. My good friend Eric Winalda soccer player, former soccer player, always used to say, what is it? Players win games, coaches lose them, referees ruin them, but I do think like players win. And at some point, hey, if that's your team, man, pick a third starter, like go with the guy, I just think it's going to get really kind of hard if you start asking this guy to throw, 2 innings here and this guy to go 1 1/3. And, I think that's kind of like a hard way to deal with things. But yeah, I don't think that they trust those guys to go through the order more than once.
Oh, last one. This time I'm serious. If the Ohtani thing doesn't work out, does this change things for Urías? I know you had said the key is like if Urías starts pitching better. He has started pitching better since he came back from the injury. The only thing that hasn't changed, though, is he's still not good on the road. And eventually, you're going to need him to win on the road. And if that doesn't change for him, then I don't think I like their chances. But if Ohtani decides to zag and the Dodgers don't get Ohtani, have the Dodgers completely ruined a relationship with Urías where they can go and say, hey, man, we wanted you all along. I don't know what you're talking about.
I know I could see him coming back. I do think he has to know, right? I do think that this is kind of like the best thing for everybody in a way, right? If the financial resources were unlimited, and let's just even say like, right. I mean, because I do think that there is like a difference of opinion, right? Where does this guy, is he a number 1? Is he a 2 or a 3? Or is he, right? Kind of like, how do you evaluate him? And I do think that even if he's not an ace, again, if the financial limit, right, finances weren't a problem, there's no, whatever, right? Pay him $200 million to be a 2 or a 3. That's fine, right? But they are operating with some semblance of like a budget, and I do think, yeah, like, right, they might not in the end give him what he wants. It's going to be a fascinating free agency too, I think, right? It's going to be, so much is going to depend now on really, how he finishes the season out. I think kind of coming into the year, honestly, I would have probably pegged his, given the fact that like Scott Boras is really good at this too, the relatively low amount of innings he's pitched, the fact that I think, kind of like Mexican heavy markets like Arizona, Chicago have money, and can use like that type of pitcher. I would have pegged him close to 250 million, right? I know even 200 would have seemed like a lot in some ways, but like that's the market now. And I think you kind of add all the other stuff. Like I could have seen 250 easy. I'm not sure that deal's necessarily still out there, And I do think at the end of the day, like, look, like he's, whatever it is, I think he's for the most part still pretty comfortable here. I think that as long as they can kind of dress it up in a way where he doesn't feel disrespected, right? Because that's obviously, every Latino guy, that's the main thing that we always feel, right? Is they just don't disrespect us. Yeah, I think he could come back. I just think that I just kind of wonder if there are other teams, again, where he would be a greater priority, right? And, in some ways, it's going to be interesting too, the way the market moves, because until Ohtani goes off the board, a lot of things can't happen now. So, if you're another big free agent, you can either try to kind of preempt everything and get something done before, or you can wait to get something done afterwards. Now, again, I've thought like Arizona in some ways is kind of a match for Urías because, it's, again, very Mexican city. It's a young team that's kind of on the up, right? And they're kind of coming up. And, what better than to bring in a guy who has championship talent, right, experience, who can anchor, right, or be one of the anchors of your pitching staff, right, a young pitching staff that's pretty young and dynamic and exciting. I think there's like a fit there, right? And I don't think they would necessarily be in on like the Ohtani sweepstakes, right? Or that they wouldn't have a really great chance at it. Now the Cubs, right, might kind of be on the sidelines a little bit, and they might be waiting. The San Francisco Giants, my guess, they probably won't make another big expenditure until they know whether or not they're in on Ohtani or not. I think those teams will wait. But like, yeah, I could see, free agency opens, boom, Urías signs with the Diamondbacks, and like it's over, So, but I do think that if the Dodgers approach it the right way, right, and none of those other teams move too quickly, I do think that there's a chance that he comes back for sure.
There you go, babyface. Do you feel better? It's not going to be the show pods that are going to get Urías, and it's just going to be the D-backs?
I mean, I'm still not convinced. I mean, I don't understand where the Padres have been getting all this money in the first place. So, I mean, until they say we're tapping out, I mean, I'm still not convinced that they won't make a move.
Well, I mean, he is a billionaire. But anyways, we want to thank Dylan for giving us all this knowledge. I feel like I just took a class on Japan, Dylan. And by the way, I love your stories. I'm sorry that you were tortured going to Japanese school once a week. I thought it was hilarious, man. I really think you should turn that into a one-man show and put it on stage.
I got so many more stories, man. We gotta. One of these days we'll get together for a beer. I'll tell you about all the trauma I sustained early in life.
So there you have it. Dylan, where can our listeners, our viewers, where can they follow you on the social media?
On pretty much every social media thing, I'm at Dylan Hernandez. And you can find my work at latimes.com/sports. And like you so generously mentioned, if you guys could help by subscribing, keep our place from going out of business, that'd be really, really appreciated. Because my kids are still young, man. I can't afford to be out of work anytime soon.
Look, your stuff is good and it's worth reading because you ask the questions that all these fans tweet. Why doesn't anybody ask them this? And it's like, well, Dylan does. Look, he is the most feared journalist in LA because he asks the questions that you guys all want to be asked. So you need to support him. Get the subscription to the LA Times. Anyways, this has been a real joy for me, Dylan. That's all I got.
Thank you so much. This is always fun. I always have fun being on here. So, thank you so much for having me back on, and hope we can do this again.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Bleed Los Podcast. Yo ha sido su servidor Juan Ramírez de parte de mi colega Babyface. Nos vemos para la próxima. This episode of the Bleed Los Podcast has been brought to you by betonline.ag, where the game starts.